after that agreement was concluded, which was sort of November 2012, I think you said it was towards the end of 2012 and early 2013 that you started to become quite skeptical about the value.
The next year.
It was at the early part of 2013.
Yes.
And that is because, again, just to clarify, I've understood your evidence, the parliamentary questions started to come towards the end of 2012. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. And then if we can pick up in your affidavit at page 8, you said 8.1, to my knowledge, there was no contract between TNA and Eskom between April 2013 and March 2014. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And as I understood your earlier evidence, that was partly because you had made a decision by that point that this was not good for Eskom's reputation, and you had concerns about the value. Is that right?
We had concern about the value. Notwithstanding that, there were a lot of pushing and
Is that pressure?
Yes, a lot of pressure.
From whom?
From the TNA itself and from the company. And it was interesting from the company that the pressure was that guys find a way. And that is why the chief financial officer got involved. And that's the process where I was not involved but I do know that when I totally washed my hands of this, that the procurement division started to find a way in which they can do this contract, but they never succeeded.
When was that you washed your hands of it?
I'm not sure, but it was after signing of the second contract and
Right.
delivering on it. But I don't remember the dates quite.
But somewhere in that period, April 2013 to March 2014, is that right?
Almost, yeah.
Yes.
Do you, when you refer to you washing your hands of this, are you referring to when you made the decision that this was not good for Eskom, you did not want another contract to be concluded?
It was a number of things, but we can put them
Under
all
that?
together.
Okay.
Because it was not only parliamentary questions. My team was under tremendous pressure because they had to do media questions. And there were a lot of media questions that had to be answered. And a media question, it's very strenuous, not the contents, the timing. You get a question at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They need the response the very same evening. You have to, and it must be signed off by the chief executive officer. So you have the problem of, you have to look for the chief executive officer to sign off. So because there were just so many, we felt that this is not working for us at all.
So, but washing your hands of this, does it relate to the decision, your decision as far as you were concerned, that you didn't want Eskom to have another contract? The reasons why you came to that conclusion might be many, but does it relate to that?
It relates to that.
Yes.
There was also a selfish part of it.
Yes.
Really, was from the reputation point of view. One of the studies we did at Eskom was Reputation Institute.
Yes.
And the requirement, that's why I talk about the selfish part, it was part of our, what do you call it?
Induction pack or
No.
something?
The
policies?
The goals or the requirements that you had to meet for my team to get a bonus itself.
Or performance, for performance bonuses?
Yeah, not for performance bonus, just only because you had that score.
Oh.
You know, compared
So-
you are compared to other companies, which is not good for you. And ultimately, it also hit you on the bottom in that if you don't reach a certain score, a certain percentage of your bonus would be taken off.
Basically, it's got something to do that with the fact that your involvement in a certain thing could result in your performance assessment being negative?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And just the company, I mean, we were...
The reputation of the company as
Yeah,
well.
we had to answer a lot of questions, really.
Okay.
Mr. Treyu, at paragraph 8.1 on page 8, where we were, you said that there was no contract between TNA and Eskom between April 2013 and March 2014. Are you aware of any ad hoc breakfasts that were sponsored in that period?
There might have been, but I don't have the details of them. There might have been. Because, you see, there is also something that happens at most companies and Eskom, where a certain division may feel like they want to sponsor something or a breakfast, that this particular breakfast by the Department of Trade and Industry, we like what is going to happen, what is going to want to be part of it.
So would that have come from a division, or are you aware of?
No,
one?
it will come from different divisions or from the Chief Executive Officer. We didn't have the money for.
Not from you per se?
Not from me per se.
Right. Could we go in Mr. Pretorius's second bundle, that's MM1B?
This one.
And it's page 768, which is right at the end after tab 33.
768. I'm closer to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Treasurer, do you recall this letter?
Yes, I recall this letter now.
It's a letter that you wrote, is that correct?
Yes.
To Mr. Kanan Lakmirharan, correct? What position did he hold?
Kanan was two positions, technology and commercial acting, but also he worked in the office of the Chief Executive Officer.
Okay, and what is the date of this letter?
23 July.
2013.
Yes.
Right. And what are you saying in this letter?
Requesting the breakfast featuring Minister of Public Enterprises. The breakfast will take the Minister will engage with the trainees and various CEOs. The Public of Enterprise holds more than 1,000 trainees along with stakeholders. The trainees will interact directly with the Minister leadership. CEOs will be given a platform to update attendees and viewers on the initiative to impact training and create new jobs. For ease of reference, I attach a proposal from the New Age which provide additional information and the proposed packages. I therefore request that you approve the policy to the value 1.3 and provide the necessary funds to execute the payment. Yes.
So this is in that period where you had said you were not in favor of contracting with the TNA, is that right?
Yes.
But you are, as I understand this letter, proposing here in July of 2013 that Eskom should spend 1.2 million now on a breakfast that Mr. Gigaba, the then Minister of Public Enterprises, was to be the guest speaker at. Is that right?
Yes.
How does that square with your concerns by that stage of the reputational impact and the lack of value?
It still impaired that because if you can recall, I said there continued to be a lot of pushing and asking, and this directly came from the office of the Chief Executive Officer, that we will receive this request there because they're going to meet with our minister and do this event.
But, Mr. Treyu, as I understand it, by this stage, you are very skeptical about the value and you're worried about reputational interest. Is that correct?
Yes.
So why don't you respond and say, I don't support it?
Well, it doesn't work that way normally. You can, but it doesn't work that normally. When the office of it, because the chief executive officer comes to you and say to you, I would like you to draft a letter. Here are the contents of the letter, because here is the imperative. We need to meet with them, what do you call it, the chief executive officer. I say, well, this is what you want, I will do it for you, and you will approve it or not approve it. That is the view I took, and I think I should have reacted differently.
Let's just go
I'm
through
sorry,
that.
I just want to hear that last portion.
I should have reacted differently, but I don't know
okay.
whether. But my view
Yes.
was that normally how it works, even on procurement, generally, I tell my senior, can you put together a letter or a proposal? This is what I want to do. This is what it must include. You send it back to him. He doesn't like it. He sends it back to you. When you send, then he said, I will approve this and continue, you see.
So was this letter preceded by the Chief Executive Officer of Eskom telling you that he wanted you to prepare this letter?
Yes.
Who was the Chief Executive at that time?
I think it was Brian Damas. Yeah, it was Brian Damas.
So Brian Damas, who'd previously told you you must contract initially with TNA, do you specifically recall an interaction with him at which he said you need to put together a letter requesting approval for 1.2 million for a breakfast that Mr. Gigaba is going to attend?
Not the date, but because we met on a regular basis. We met on a very regular, almost weekly.
So you have a specific memory that it was another instruction from Mr. Damas?
Yes, it was.
Why doesn't Mr. Damas just approve it?
That's approved it. No, there must be what you refer to it, a source document, like we have where did this start from?
But-
Always a source document, yes.
And why then doesn't it say, dear Mr. Damas, I refer to the discussion we had in which you instructed that I prepare a proposal for the 1.2 million that's going to be spent on this breakfast?
No, that's not normally how you get executive. Unless you are disputing for chief executive, I don't want to take instruction. No. I was not.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Your voice is going down, so.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
I'm saying in this point in time, I didn't think it's necessary for me to take issue with the chief executive officer over this request, because in their view, this is how they want the company to run. And as it's mentioned in the letter, he's going to be participating, he's part of the event with his own responsible minister. Now, it would be, I can understand your view, but in my view, it would be odd just to say, no, I'm not going to do it. That's insubordination. You just do what you want, and when you tell them, there's no budget, and he tells you, no, the budget will be from Kanan. Kanan is in the office of the chief executive officer, directly.
Mr. Trey, how could it ever be insubordination if you are doing the right thing?
Well, it can be insubordination after the fact when you look at it in hindsight.
Mr. Trey, by this stage, I understand you to have formed the view that there was no value for Eskom in these contracts. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I don't like the word value because people are reading the newspapers and want to feel, but I'm saying reputational risk was.
Because your evidence earlier was that there was no value to the commercial relationship.
But mostly it was reputation. But remember that this is how we do for chief executive. I give you an instruction and write it to my office, and this is what you write to his office, to have evidence of the source document. When we do a trail for auditing purposes, the first thing they want is where is the source document? And this would be the source document for that type of thing. The question then need to be for him to answer, why did you approve it? Why did you give that instruction?
Mr. Trey, just at the level of governance, do you accept that when this happens, when subordinates are instructed by their bosses to write proposals that look like it's coming from the division, that is a misrepresentation of the true facts.
It is not if it comes from the relevant department. Chief Executive Officer would ask relevant, if it's about, it's the department responsible for human resources, it's a human resources issues. I want the following people to be employed to do the same type of thing. All the documents, the proposals and everything will be made by that department and sent to the Chief Executive Officer. It's not misrepresentation. It might be a wrong thing, but it may not, because they are the relevant division. Everything that dealt with media, communication, and what have you, came from my division.
And if you disagreed with the substance of what you were being asked to write, I understand you to say you didn't really have an option. You needed to put together the proposal.
Yeah.
Would it be correct to say when you when you are given an instruction by your superior, there are circumstances where you would comply with the instruction happily?
Yes.
There are circumstances where you would comply but not happily, maybe grudgingly, maybe with a little bit of some unhappiness but comply. And then there would be circumstances where you would say, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And that may depend on how strongly you feel about the instruction.
How strongly you feel about it, or if you fear for your job and or whatever.
Yes.
But the point of the matter here that I want to mention is that the persons that gives this instruction are also conscious of your fears is not their fears, probably. You see, they see this question. Let me take, for example, the Chief Executive Officer who would sign all parliamentary questions. So he's aware of what is contained, that what is happening in one of his division or other. Media queries are signed by the Chief Executive Officer, not any other person. If he wants to do something, and he's aware of all the risks and what have you, you also can reach a decision. He wants it, let me give it to him, and he will continue and follow the proper procedures. Because this does not say immediately that this is what's happening, and then that person will follow a procedure. That's what you do. That's in my view, and I've seen this happening all of the time. If you look at all proposals, there will always be, sometimes it can even be the most junior person putting it together, who may not even have the risk and everything, and only realize when the questions are being asked that I was just putting together what was requested of me. So the bosses here were conscious of the challenges that not me now, not my division, ESCOM was challenged.
Mr. Trey, are you aware whether that particular breakfast was sponsored?
I'm not aware, but the breakfast did take place. I still recall it was one big breakfast in Pretoria. I don't remember the part, but it's somewhere in Pretoria East in a very big, unusual church. But I don't know. Yes.
I can confirm just for the record that it was paid for.
Yes.
That appears actually from an answer to the public protector that we looked at yesterday, Chair. It's not necessary to go there. But are you aware of any process, that proper process that you described being followed before the 1.2 million was paid?
No. It just went to the office of the Chief Executive Officer.
And the Chief Executive approved
We
it?
were not going to get involved anymore with the technicalities of these issues.
Despite the fact it was a sponsorship, and if it had followed process, it would have needed to go to the committee, as you'd endeavoured to do the previous year.
Yes.
So,
And the Chief Executive Officer was aware because he signed this and agreed to, yes.
so was Was the justification for not taking it to the committee that the instruction came from the group chief executive?
No,
or
I don't
is
know.
the position?
No. If you write to them,
Yeah,
that's the source document.
yes,
The people who receive it, you don't control
what they do with it.
you can't even give them instruction to.
Yeah. So it would have been the office of the group chief executive which would have needed to take it to the committee.
Ganan, yes,
Yeah, not your division.
yes.
Okay.
We looked at sponsorship from all over so they would have had to come to
To the committee.
the committee.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Trejo, sorry, your last bit of testimony is precisely my understanding of it. Insofar as this business breakfast was a sponsorship, it still needed to be approved by the sponsorship committee. Is that not correct?
This is what I'm saying.
Yes, and in this case, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Let's move then to the third contract, if we may. And I'm back at page 8 of your affidavit in Exhibit MM2. And for the third contract, we need to move forward in time to April 2014.
I'm sorry, what page are we
Apologies,
going to?
Chair. It's page 8
Oh,
of Mr.
okay.
Trejo's affidavit.
Okay.
And we're at the bottom of page 8 at paragraph 8.2. There you talk about April 2014 and a new interim CEO of Eskom being appointed. Who was that?
Mr. Machila, Colin.
And this is the stage you gave evidence yesterday where there's now another layer of reporting. You don't report any longer directly to the chief executive, you report to Ms. Erica Johnson. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Tell us about how the third contract came about, Mr. Trejo.
Erica Johnson reported to, she said on ESCO, I was not sitting on ESCO. On her normal meeting with Erica, told Erica that.
Who told Erica, just so that we can have...
Okay, Colin, the chief executive
Okay,
officer.
so Mr. Majila, just so that we can get it clear for the record,
And
Mr.
Ms. Johnson.
Colin,
and Ms. Johnson.
Colin Machila told Mr. Erica Johnson that he would want us to sponsor the breakfast, and he would want a long-term contract of about 3 years. I must mention something which is not here. It's simply because I don't have the documents, but I don't know. Is that at the time that we totally were refusing to deal with the breakfast, one of the things that as pressure come, and these are things that you talk about, was that if ever these breakfasts have to be
Done again.
engaged into, it will have to be the office of a chief executive officer. And as I recall, Mr. Pretoria's team, as they were, Erica was writing letters to all the colleagues to ask them to indicate how much money they are going to have for different sponsorship, that he requested that if there's money, any money which is going to be allocated for TNA, it must be allocated in the office of the chief executive officer. And we wanted, what we also wanted to do, because we were worried, we wanted now to change the process of sponsorship, that you will still have to come to the committee, but EXCO used never to be involved at all with sponsorship at all. EXCO must approve that Chairman Zondo wants to sponsor, tell us what you want to sponsor for this year, and give us an amount. And then you go to another one, and another one, and another one, and that type of thing. So we were engaged currently at the same time. And a strong feeling was that if any money has to be allocated for TNA, because The debate of sponsoring TNA never stopped. These guys, some questions, they were still happening in other departments and whatever. So they never stopped whilst we stopped for this year. So Erica was informed. I don't know whether he was instructed, what of you. He was to say, you will have to put together a proposal for us, and then it was detailed to him, sponsor a breakfast. And Erica Johnson came to me, and most importantly, he told me and said, Chosa, I did tell the Chief Executive Officer that these breakfasts are not good for us, for our reputation, but the Chief Executive Officer insisted that he will deal with all the problems, he will deal with the procurement, he has the authority, you guys just do the source document for me. And then it came to me, and I worked with my team to put together the source document.
Thank you, Mr. Treyu. Before we get to that document, I do just recall something I wanted to ask you about. You indicated in your evidence earlier that Mr. Pretorius never conveyed to you his reservations about these contracts. Do you recall giving that evidence?
Yes.
Mr. Pretorius's evidence yesterday included a PowerPoint presentation that he prepared in April of 2013, in which he set out all the reasons why he did not recommend further contracts with the TNA. And that is a PowerPoint presentation you'll find in MM1B.
MM1B. Page?
Page 766, which is towards the end under tab 33.
You want to start 766?
Yes, because this is the part of the presentation where he sets out why the sponsorship is not recommended. He says that this PowerPoint presentation was provided to you. Do you recall it?
No.
You don't?
No. And PowerPoint will never be submitted to me. What was submitted to me, we have a form. If you want something to be submitted to EXCO or to MENCO, you put together a Word document, and maybe it's here, and then that Word document goes to the secretariat of the relevant committee. And then in that committee, all the members who are being expected to have read the Word document, and you only present the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes. You see, at this time, April 2013, I understand your evidence to be you also had skepticism about this arrangement. And what's interesting about this page is many of the things that Mr. Pretorius says on this page are the things you've been testifying about today. I also understand your evidence to be, by this stage, you were talking to your team quite a bit about the problems with the parliamentary questions, the reputational risks. So are you quite sure that at no point Mr. Pretorius indicated to you that he had reservations about this sponsorship?
Not at all. He has never, ever come to me about the reservation, about the sponsorship.
So when he said at the first bullet there, the sponsorship does not meet the minimum requirements, and therefore it is recommended that it be declined, is that consistent with your view at the time, at least?
First of all, I would have hoped to this type of presentation would have been given at the first, after the first, very, very first. Remember, it is Mr. Pretorius that decided not to go for the sponsorship committee, to go to media shop with his boss. So after all this, they should have come back with this presentation. And this presentation, they would have to take, because members of the sponsorship committee sits on the MENCO. He would have had to take this to MENCO so that they are privy when they do the evaluation to this decision. For him, I don't understand why he would bring a PowerPoint to me, you know, and he's reporting to Kepe, because presentations that go to MENCO come now in the name, they can be done by many other people under you. They come in the name of the boss of the division. When I go to EXCO, all the documents are done for me by my team, but I'm the one who will go there. And if I'm not a good expert, I'll ask EXCO that I'll just make an introduction, and my team member will make a presentation. I'm seeing this for the very first time. But the information in it was quite clear. This information was quite clear to everybody.
So you say the reasons that he gives here,
Yes.
maybe if you haven't had much time to go through all of them, maybe it's not all of them, but those that you have been able to see,
Yes.
you are able to say those are true. Those were true at the time.
In my view, but they
Yes.
would have been had to be tested by the
Yes.
sponsorship committee.
Yes, but to you, they appear to have been valid reasons,
Let me,
or reasons that you could
yes.
you could accommodate as
Yeah.
possibly
And
true.
Yeah, there's a technical thing that I need to mention here. You may have a player that is very good, but this behavior, very bad,
Yes,
you see.
yes,
So you don't exclude him because of not scoring gold.
Yes.
You include. So there are, and the fact that if you say they were selling 32,000 newspapers and the readership goes to 70, it's a plus. It may not be insignificant. So in my evaluating of them and my dislike of them, really, because it has come to, I would not just rightly write them off. But this is not misrepresentation of what the feeling
was, yeah.
was
At the time.
around the company.
Okay.
And when we were answering these parliamentary questions, because they were impacting directly on my division. Yes, ma'am.
So I understand you to say, despite not having been provided with that PowerPoint, you share some of Mr. Pretorius's reservations about supporting the sponsorship that are contained there. Mr. Treyer, then let's move to Ms. Johnson's indication to you that there was an instruction from the Chief Executive to put together a proposal. Again, I'm going to ask, why did you not convey to her then that you were uncomfortable doing so because you didn't see value in the sponsorship?
No, she was aware. She was aware. She was uncomfortable herself. No, she was uncomfortable, and I made her so, even without me telling him, he did mention to me that he did inform the Chief Executive Officer.
But you still put the proposal together, and if I may, we can go to it. It's at page 39 of your bundle. That's MM2.
Of mine.
Of your bundle.
Why do you say MM?
Sorry, your bundle is an exhibit. It's called MM2.
Oh,
That's the
meaning
exhibit on the
this-
spine.
On the spine,
Yeah.
indeed.
Oh, number, which?
Number 39, page 39, 39
yeah,
in the
okay,
top right.
Thanks. Sorry about, yes,
Now, this is the proposal. Is that correct?
yes.
And it's prepared by you. If you go over to page 42, is that correct?
Yes.
I'd like to highlight just a few features of it.
Yes.
The second paragraph on page 39 says, I have also attached the New Age Business Breakfast sponsorship proposal we've received from TNA Media for your consideration. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then over the page at page 40, there's a heading called Justification.
Yes.
And that first paragraph talks all about sponsorships and the role they play in ESCOM. Mr. Treyer, can I ask you, was there any doubt in your mind when you put this together that this contract was going to be a sponsorship?
No, there was never a doubt. That is why here we call sponsorship the form of, yeah.
Indeed, all the previous contracts had referred to sponsorships. You're
All of-
referring to sponsorships.
all
It
of-
once, on a rare occasion, went to the sponsorship committee. Is it fair to say we're in the realm of sponsorships in ESCOM?
There you are.
Thank you. Let's go over to page 41, if we may. 41 indicates that the total budget will be 43.2 million, and that is at a cost of 1.2 million per event.
Yes.
Mr. Treyer, what justified that jump to 1.2 million per event, where Eskom had previously been paying 1 million?
What I became quite aware at the time was that when this proposal came to me, it had already served as the chief executive officer. What discussion he was having, and it was quite clear that there is conscious discussion between the chief executive officer and you'll see when we have come to the contract.
So, sorry, the chief executive officer being Mr. Majila and TNA, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So they had had prior conversations and they had somehow agreed at 1.2 million.
I'm not sure they had, but it was quite clear that it was quite clear in the emails that yes, they've been talking.
Did you query the 200,000 Rand increase per breakfast?
I don't recall querying it, but I do know at what time they had. I had spoken to them that they have to look at this number, and because I had asked them to look at this number, they then said that they will only do it when we increase the frequency. That is more than
36.
446, and I made the chief executive officer aware. So there's to say this. They agreed first, and later they wrote another letter. And when they agreed, I sent almost like a celebratory letter to the office of chief executive officer, to Mr. Freddie Ndo, copying the chief executive officer, that these guys, now that we're doing this, they've reduced, it's now 1 million Rand. Not what they had requested on the proposal that they had discussed with you, because they had discussed. Later, they wrote a letter and said, no. You misunderstood us. We said that it will be lowered by 200 million per breakfast on condition that you increase the frequency to above 36.
What I don't understand, Mr. Chair, is how you as ESCOM, who have been approached by this small new newspaper, and they asked you to sponsor their breakfast show, end up being like you are begging them for something. It's like they are dictating terms to you. But you are ESCOM. You are ESCOM. You have been around for a long time. You are financial muscle.
Yes.
They are the ones who need you, not you needing them. But here now, they talk about lowering the amount and you are celebrating.
Yes.
Huh? Whereas you should be the one saying, we'll only do this for you under the following terms and conditions. Take it or leave it. That's what I don't understand.
I like putting off the...
It's like you are under some kind of hold or control to comply with whatever they want to do as ESCOM.
Yeah, that was the situation.
That was the situation.
In my mind, it was this. You can see it quite clearly. It was a situation.
What brought that situation about?
Well, if you get your chief executive officer thinking that something is good, is doing extremely well, and they go there and they speak in those events and they answer parliamentary questions and they're happy to subject themselves to the embarrassment of parliamentary questions, subject themselves to the embarrassment of the media, then Did you ever think that
this situation where this giant ESCOM was acting like this to this small newspaper came about because of anything connected with something that was mentioned by the person who wrote that briefing about TNA and said that, you know, TNA is said to be close to the president and so on. Is it possible that that was playing in the minds of some people within ESCOM for this situation to arise where this giant is acting like this?
Chair, to tell you the truth, I've never ever discussed, there's never a situation where the chief executive officer has ever said to me, the minister so said this and said this. If the minister's name was concerned, it would be like let's put together a letter, we are going to do this event with the minister. Not like we have been instructed, I'll be lying. Mr. Brian Damas never, ever, ever implicated the minister in what we're doing. The discussions were that we are supporting, get them as I come up because I want this, we're supporting the small new newspaper. It has got good news. Whenever we are attacked by other newspapers, they're doing extremely well and what have you. But to answer your ultimate question, I mean, it's all these type of things that I mentioned, and they are there about what media shop even said about itself. But also, when we started seeing all ministers, I mean, they would arrange any minister to come and speak at a particular breakfast. We are a state-owned enterprise. I was the head of stakeholder engagement. That included government relations. It was not always easy to get a meeting with a minister. You see, these guys on any, this breakfast would be on a Friday. On any Friday, they would meet the minister. Something that was not mentioned, we did not mention because it was not even a part of the proposition. But what they would allow a company sponsoring to do is that, you know, there's, now that I'm no more working, I forget these things. Let me call it an ante room, where in the morning you would come in and sit with the minister and you can articulate all your problems about the same department and, you know, as we have in tea, coffee, and those meetings would take about 30 minutes or whatever. They could arrange those type of things. So they did have that, I have no doubt, has had a lot of influence in the mind of, including myself. I can't exclude myself in that because I am not talking about, they demonstrated it. It was there. It was available and it was thick, and as a government relations expert, I could see that these guys have a lot of influence. So that had a lot to do with that trend.
I think that's very, I think that's quite helpful. You see, I had evidence from Mr. Themba Masego last year, and part of his evidence was that Mr. Ajay Gupta said to him on the occasion when they had a meeting, and according to Mr. Masego, Mr. Ajay Gupta was demanding that the whole advertising budget of GCIS or of government spend on advertising should be directed to TNA. Mr. Masego said when he resisted this idea and told Mr. Ajay Gupta that, no, it doesn't work like that, you know, can't do that. He said, he demanded that he should do it and said, if there was any minister who was giving him problems about this or was not cooperating, Mr. Masego should tell Mr. Ajay Gupta. And I can't remember the actual wording, but my recollection is that Mr. Masego said, Mr. Ajay Gupta said, we will summon that minister here. Mr. Masego said to me, he objected to this man talking like this about his seniors, you know. So it seems to me that if it is true that that is what Mr. Ajay Gupta said to Mr. Masego, he may have sought to show Mr. Masego what kind of influence he had or the family had, which you seem to be talking about in terms of influence them. They seem to be able to get ministers easily and so on.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's something that also Mr. Maseko mentioned, and I'm not saying it applies to me, but
Yes.
I think one of the important things he mentioned that many of my colleagues could have talked like this had they had access that I had with Lituli House. He mentioned it that somewhere
Yes,
when he
yes,
talked about
yes.
that he had
Yes.
comfort to a certain extent and that there's somebody to call. And I do recall that, as I said, Mr. Dames has never ever said, any minister said this to me and what have you, in the negative or in the
Yeah.
pressure. He had said,
Yes.
I was government relations, so he had said many things.
Yes, yeah.
But I recall that in Parliament, one of the things that he mentioned, that the manner in which he was spoken to in a meeting he attended and with the Gupta somewhere, he was extremely angry. He used the word angry.
Mr. Dames,
Yeah, Dames somewhere.
is that so?
But I don't know
The
yes,
details.
the details of that meeting.
Okay.
When he was asked, have you ever met the Guptas? And he said that he was extremely, extremely angry to have been spoken to like that.
But was he talking about being spoken to by members of parliament or
No,
or by the Gupta family?
Yeah,
Gupta
yeah,
people?
I don't know who among the.
Yeah, but what?
Yes, that
Oh.
the meeting
Yes.
was not a cordial meeting
Yes,
as he had
yes.
expected.
Yes.
First of all, he was taken there under false pretext according to him. Number two, the manner in which he was spoken to, he did not like it.
Well, that's quite important. Thank you.
Mr. Treyu, notwithstanding that, as I have it, until 2013, Mr. Damas was the one who was instructing you to enter into the contracts with TNA. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now we're in 2014, and you've put together the proposal for Mr. Majila for the 43 million rand contract. And we're at page 41 in your exhibit MM2. Can I just clarify, did you put this proposal together?
I put it together, but there were changes that were done in consultation with his office.
With Mr. Majila's office?
Yes.
If we are at page 41, you'll see at the bottom there's a section called Key Assumptions, where you set out the outcome of certain research that was undertaken with regard to the 49M campaign, and it indicated that opportunities such as sponsorship of the business briefings contributed to an 87% awareness by the public of the 49M campaign. Where is that information from?
That information is from a study which was done by Mr. Peter Pretorius. I don't have it with me, but yes.
Well, Mr. Pretorius's evidence yesterday was that there was market research done on the 49M campaign, but there was no way in which you could link the public awareness of the campaign to the sponsorship of the business briefings. Do you recall that evidence?
I recall that evidence.
And he said that insofar as that statement was made to the public protector, it was false. Do you recall that?
I recall that, but the study, he said for the first time, when he was putting together that his affidavit, When he was putting together to the public protector, because he did that study, he didn't say so.
Well, his evidence is that he did, and his evidence is that he sought to resist the pressure to draw this link between the awareness for the public campaign and the business briefings. Mr. Chweyu, are you aware of anyone else raising concerns about this causal link between the sponsorship of the business breakfasts and awareness of the 49M campaign?
I don't recall that. Let's have it this. When we talk about 49M, I think here, and this is what I'm thinking now, is that the study was about the whole campaign.
Yes, indeed it
You
was.
see.
Not about the breakfast shows.
Yeah. So the breakfast may have contributed 1% or 20% or 30% and all those type of things. But when we received this study, this was just written 49. So we are talking 49M. Yeah.
Indeed. I think that's entirely consistent with Mr. Pretorius's
Yeah.
evidence. But then I want to know why you drew any link between the outcome of that research and the business breakfasts in a proposal for Eskom to spend 43 million rand on them.
Because that's the information I got from Mr. Pretorius' information. I contacted my team to say, what are the issues? And they gave me this information, which is the information they gave me to the public protector.
Yes.
All that, this type of information, I would not have sourced it anywhere but from my marketing team.
And you weren't aware of concerns being raised about that causality?
No, not at all.
Okay, I'd like to take you to some places where that was drawn to your attention, if I may.
Oh, where's that?
Okay, let's start in, it's in Mr. Pretorius's bundle.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hoffman. I just want to make sure before you proceed that we are on the same page. Excuse me. That last paragraph at page 41, the one you have just referred to.
Yes.
Mr. Shew,
Yes,
that second sentence, which goes up to the third line, is it meant to say there is a recent research that was undertaken with regard to the 49M campaign?
Yes.
And that research has indicated that opportunities such as the sponsorship of the business briefings contributed to an 87% awareness by the public of the 49 million campaign. Did it mean to say the breakfast shows have made some contribution to a situation where the 49 million campaign, where the awareness by the public of the 49 million campaign has risen to 87%?
No, I said recent research undertaken with regard to 49M, and the research was taken by Mr. Pretorius, indicate that opportunities such as the sponsorship of the business briefing, this type contributed to a 87% awareness of the public of 49M campaign. And I think I took it directly from the research that Mr. Pretorius provided.
Yes, but
me.
what I'm trying to establish is whether you sought to say, or this research sought to say, to the extent that you now had an 87% awareness of the 49 million campaign, it's because of these breakfast shows, or it was to say it's because of, among others,
the 49M.
So
but I think I took the paragraph just as it is.
Yes,
from the,
but I want to understand, obviously you took it for a reason.
Yes.
You understood it in a certain way.
Yes.
So I'm asking whether it was meant to say it has had some contribution, even if you don't specify how much contribution, to raising awareness to 87%, or whether it was to say it is responsible for us having reached 87% awareness.
No, it was not that all of it is responsible for
Yeah.
87%.
It was simply that somewhere there is some contribution that is made.
That has always been my argument, Chair, let me say. Even when there was always an indication that, how are you sure? That is zero. And I say, I don't think so, really. There is some circulation. There are some people watching. And also, the questions themselves, or parliamentary questions, and the media questions, though negative, did talk, most of them were talking about 49M, and I can only assume, based on that, some level of either leadership or awareness happened. The numbers are the ones that I cannot defend, as I got them from the study that was conducted.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure I understand exactly.
Indeed, Chair.
Yes.
Can I just follow up on that? I'm going to take you to the Public Protector response in a moment. But, Mr. Treyu, the evidence that was given by, well, the response that was assembled by the media shop when the first parliamentary questions came through asking for whether there had been independent analysis done, said there's no way that analysis can be done. Do you recall that? They said not for a specific media. They said this campaign is run on a holistic basis.
Yes.
And it is not possible then to attribute any particular awareness in the 49M campaign to a particular advertisement or a particular briefing. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Yes. So actually, the causality point that's sought to be made here, and I'm following up on your question, Chair, hadn't been the subject of any independent study, had it?
No.
No.
But as you do understand too, issues of causality, this causes this.
Indeed. It's almost impossible to
Can be
establish, isn't
difficult,
it?
yeah.
Yeah, no, I
3 million rand to TN attempt at making a causal link, isn't
maybe
there?
an attempt, but I'm saying recent study indicate that opportunities such as this, you know, and they'll have to read that and make a decision. But I would not have made a direct causality between the two.
Except
And,
you authored this
yeah,
letter.
and I should not have just expunged this and have it as it is here. And our study people also should have probably drafted it much more better for us.
Indeed, Mr. Treyu, and in fairness to you, that's in essence where Mr. Pretorius ended up, frankly, yesterday. He said that statement was false. It should not have gone to the Public Protector, and I understand you to say now you agree with that.
Yeah.
This should not have found its way into a proposal for 43 million rand to be spent with the TNA.
Yeah, the statement was false after Mr. Pretorius reflected on it, but as he got it from a study, it causality. He did a study, and the study said that, and that was what he put in the Public Protector. Today, in retrospect, after knowing all the things that happened, and after speaking to Media House and what have you, he comes back and say, it's wrong. And I think that he's still at ESCOM is something that, because I'm sure they're still using the same company, to engage with that company to say, but how did you give us an information that would make us to answer such an important document?
Mr. Treyu, I don't want to belabor the point, but as I understand Mr. Pretorius's evidence, the study never drew that causality link because it couldn't. It's that for the purposes of answering the Public Protector's question, that link was falsely made. That is, as I understand, his evidence.
Yeah. Well, that is what we got from what he put together.
Mr. Treyo, I know we're running out of time, so I just want to, if you want to go to the document, I'm happy for us to do so. But I do have a question. The public protector response spoke about a 73% awareness, not an 87% awareness. Do you have any idea where the 87% came from?
I don't know. We might have made a mistake. Yeah, no, it might have been a mistake.
Certainly.
Yeah, because all those figures, as you can see, we took up from there.
Thank you. And then just to conclude on this point, at 42,
Where are we now?
we are back in the proposal, in your affidavit at page 42.
Page, wait for me. Page 42. Oh. Yes,
The concluding...
Annexure 6.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Oh, apologies, just before Annexure 6. Annexure 6 commences on page 43, and we're at page 42.
Okay.
It's the last page of your proposal to Mr. Majila.
Yeah.
You see, Chair, back to your question about what was sought to be conveyed in that paragraph we were focusing on. This proposal concludes, before recommendation, with the following sentence. Therefore, continued use of this sponsorship tool, which has produced tangible results, ought to be supported. Mr. Treyo, I put to you that that inclusion of the 87% was precisely designed to indicate to the reader that there were tangible results that had been achieved through the business briefings, and that had even been quantified in the order of 87%, and then to conclude the proposal on the basis that you should continue to use this tool because it had produced those very tangible results that had been referred to earlier in the letter. Is that a fair reading?
No. As I said, that was a key assumption. Then 87, as you indicated now, whether it was 87 or 82, at that time when he was writing this, even if it was 56, yes, it was trying to show that, this is
a good thing.
Yeah.
It's producing tangible results for ESCOM.
Yeah. And that is what the chief executive officer wanted, put me together. They had the studies themselves. But I don't think they made that mistake of 87, it's ours.
Well, that leads me to a question I wanted to ask you earlier. Am I correct in understanding that as at the time of writing this proposal, you were personally against
Yes.
these breakfast shows? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Now, the Group Chief Executive Officer has asked you to prepare a proposal.
Yes.
You prepare that proposal. That proposal has got your name. On the face of it, one is entitled to say if there are any opinions, views expressed in that proposal, they are your views. That's now before the interim chief executive signs, once you have signed. Is that right?
No, you are right to that extent, but normally in the company, that's how we work. We collect information that's relevant to an event, and the signature, but it's a proposal. It's not that you are saying this should be somebody else has to go and evaluate your proposal. It has to go into a system. If we want to buy a boiler, and somebody says, in my view, this is the boiler and all this type of thing, that's in his view and what he's done. Ultimately, if something goes wrong with the boiler, we can't blame him because then the technical guys have to go in, the procurement guys have to go in, and ultimately it has got to be approved. Similarly, with this proposal, the chief executive officer had to put, of course, his team in his office, put other documents and go to EXCO to go and...
No, before
but
we...
I do admit that to a certain extent your name gets,
Yes, I'm talking before it reaches the point where some technicians or technical people must look at whatever and verify. When the person to whom the proposal is addressed, in this case the interim executive officer or anybody who sees the proposal with your name and signature on, is entitled to say, where you say, for example, this must be supported, is entitled to say, that's your genuine view, isn't it?
yeah, I think so to answer, but in corporate doesn't work that way. You get views of all the people that reports to you, probably becomes your view at the end, and then of course as a boss, your experts in order for you, and then you sign off on it.
Yes, but what I'm saying is,
Yes.
is you are not supposed to put your signature
No, you have
to a view that you don't support, isn't it?
Yeah, probably.
You accept that.
Reluctant.
It's like you mustn't vote
In a
yes
reluctant
when
teacher.
you don't actually mean yes.
Yeah, not reluctant teacher, but that's how, in corporate, that's how we do. You put together
Yes, no,
proposals.
we'll talk about whatever justification there may be for doing it that way, but I just want us to get through the first.
Okay, no.
Yeah.
You're quite
Yeah,
correct.
that's how one should understand it.
Okay.
Yeah, but you are saying that although it is so, there is a context that must be understood
there's always
in regard to
context,
the
yeah.
corporate. Tell me about that context.
The context is that the company wants to desire something. Let's say that we want to put certain types of lights, and it happens all the time. And you believe that those lights are not as good as what the people are saying and that type of thing. And the boss said, no, we've taken a decision. We want to put them, they are good for us and what have you. Your job is go to put together a proposal for us. You know how to put a proposal, and then sign it. Yeah. That would always be the context. And it happens most of the time.
Well, maybe we go back to the proposition I put to you earlier, with which I think you agreed, that when you get an instruction, there may be an instruction with which you happily comply. There may be another one where you comply, but you are not so happy. And then there is one where you say, no, I'm not complying with this one.
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
So now, it may be, therefore, that you might not be fully in support of a certain view, but it must be that you feel you can reconcile yourself with it, you can live with it, with your name reflected as in supporting that view if you put your signature to it.
Yeah.
But where you feel very strongly, where you say, I can't associate myself with this, you would even refuse to sign.
Chair, you're quite correct, but I think I'll be much more comfortable with the second one, where reluctantly you do it, but you saying, you know what, these guys know all the challenges and what have you. There might be discussions that I'm not aware of. I'm just giving instruction to do this. Sometimes you can even say, I'm not going to express my views because they may not be accommodated since they know themselves, and say, I'll give them what happened, and you hope that they will follow the proper procedure, and somewhere else the expert will be able to say no. Our division was quite clear. We're not going to continue the breakfast. Our division, we don't have the money to do it at all, and whoever has to do it, the chief executive officer should take charge of that.
Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Troyer, do you accept that ESCOM spends public funds?
Definitely.
Are you aware that the directors of ESCOM, who would include the chief executive officer, have legal obligations not to undertake wasteful expenditure?
Big time.
If there was no value in the business breakfasts of TNA or negligible value, do you accept that that might have constituted wasteful expenditure?
It depends on the circumstances of the wasteful expenditure, but yes, overall, yes.
Who was going to check whether Eskom was entering into a contract for wasteful expenditure when it committed 43 million rand to this third contract?
EXCO.
Thank you. What I'd then like to do is go to the correspondence as it plays out in the process to conclusion of the contract. And for that purpose, I need to take you just through a series of email exchanges, Mr. Treyu. They are in your bundle, MM2, and they commence...
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. Your last question that you asked, I just want to put a follow-up because it may be relevant for the emails that you are going to. Wasn't this going to be under your division, this 43 million rand thing? Was it not?
No.
Was it going to shift to the group chief?
The group chief executive officer. Yes, that's why it came from him. We had done.
Under the previous contracts,
yes,
it would have been under your division.
Under me and all that.
In which case, you would have been the ones who must check whether you might be getting into a situation which will result in wasteful expenditure.
Yes, those type of things.
Okay, but now because
internal audit would come in and check that, which they did all the years that we're doing other contracts.
Well, but I would imagine that apart from them, you as the head
Yes.
would have had an obligation to make sure that your division doesn't do anything that could result in wasteful
Most
expenditure.
definitely.
Yes. So under contract 1 and contract 2, that would have fallen under your division to check.
Yeah.
But then now, because it was going to be under the group chief executive, then they would have to do that.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And Mr. Trey, just another follow-up question. You said it would be EXCO's responsibility to check for wasteful expenditure. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that because this contract had a value of greater than 3 million rand?
No, because the value would not be so much. It would, let's say the value would be plus, but all wasteful expenditures, regardless of the amount, internal audit takes them to EXCO ultimately before they go to the board audit committee. Because the board has to determine in different divisions how many wasteful expenditures we have, and it will be under the,
No,
So
indeed.
I'm putting EXCO here as the ultimate body that will approve something to go to the board.
Yes, I think we might be at cross purposes. I'm interested in stopping wasteful expenditure from ever taking place.
EXCO.
Right, so it's EXCO. And in the context of sponsorships, are you aware that any sponsorship to the value greater than 3 million in EXCOM had to go to EXCO for approval?
Yes.
Right, so this contract would fall into that category,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
If we then go to the correspondence, Chair, if we may, and we start at page 50.1, 50.1.
Same bundle?
Same bundle, MM2.
Okay.
We just start here. I'd just like your help with this. This is an email from Mr. Majila to yourself on the 1st of April. That's the day that Mr. Majila assumed the position of interim CEO. Is that correct?
Yes.
What is this email about?
Each and every, I'm responsible, I'm the webmaster. I have to make sure that when you get appointed, I get your picture, I get your CV, and we will shorten your CV and make sure that it is on, what do you call it?
The website?
On the website.
On the website, yes.
Thank you. So Mr. Majila was giving you his CV for that purpose.
For that purpose.
Understood. And then if you go over to page 50.6, because following that email is just the copy of Mr. Majila's CV. You'll see in the same week, on the 4th of April, that's 50.6, Mr. Hauer is writing to Mr. Majila and copying you. And it's congratulating him on his new appointment and saying that he's looking forward to partnering with Eskom. Why were you copied on that email?
Because this is a media shop talking to Eskom, and because, I assume, because of the fact that they've been trying, remember we said earlier on, they've been trying and pushing to get additional contract. So it might have been the way to show me that I'm, if we look at something there, our business briefings and a proposal of ESCOM to sponsor some of these, which means it will be my responsibility.
Understood.
Yeah, as a scripting agreement between ourselves, much like we had at Independent. So, I mean, it mentioned a relationship that I'm not even aware of. That's the reason why.
Thank you. And then we move a bit further in April, if you go over the page to page 51. Here, it's an email between yourself and Mr. Majila, is that correct?
Yes.
And what is this email conveying to Mr. Majila?
This is, let me just explain here. Because these emails are not in the right chronology. TNA wants to have this breakfast. I put together a proposal for the Chief Executive Officer. It goes to the Chief Executive Officer office. And assuming that the Chief Executive Officer will then follow whatever process he wants to do. So ultimately, he wants a contract to be signed between ESCOM and TNA. Now, in my office, there is a person who works in my office, Pindile Dlamini, who, by the way, when we were delivering the other breakfast, was the coordinator of the first, and she was the one who was doing the running, the minister. Received this contract, and then instructed the contract must be seen by Mohammed.
That's Mr. Adam.
Mr. Adam. Mr. Adam looks at the contract, and Mr. Adam, after looking at the contract, the most interesting thing is, and I must mention up front there, the template, the contract, comes first from New Age, and say, TNA, this is the type of contract we'd like ESCOM to sign. You say, no, this contract must go to Mr. Mohammed Adam. Mr. Mohammed Adams looks at the contract, makes a number of changes, sends it back to Pilile. Pilile copies me, and Pilile also sends it back now to TNA to say, this is how we would like the contract to look like. TNA responds and say, no, but you guys have changed the contract to modify the exit clause.
Mr. Trey, if I may just interrupt there, because you are jumping ahead in the chronology.
Okay.
So if we could just go systematically from page 51,
Okay.
all of the emails that you describe are going to unfold in due course. Okay. At page 51, you, Mr. Treyu, are sending an email to Mr. Majila, and you say, hi, Colin, the TNA 49 million breakfast sponsorship contract is attached for your perusal and approval. This is the version we plan to forward to the TNA.
Yes,
So I understand your evidence to be, prior to this, the legal department had looked at it.
I think so.
I think that's accurate, because if you
Because
look
here
at the
I'm-
attachments,
But I'm copying
yes,
Fredindo,
yes,
that's the Office of the Chief Executive Officer. Neo Chulanko, that's Head of Legal, reporting to,
Mr. Adam,
yeah. Tsulufela Mulife,
yes,
that's the Chief Financial Officer.
correct.
Yeah, because they are involved now, so
Yes.
with the money, I don't want to touch does, yes.
And just on the attachments, it says this is revision 8, reviewed by legal department, right? Do you see that?
Oh,
on
yes,
attachments?
revision 8, yes.
I'm just saying that's further confirmation that this had been through the lawyers.
Yes.
And then I'd like to draw you to 2 changes that the ESCOM lawyers made to this contract.
Yes.
The first is at page 54. This is where you were starting to jump ahead, so I just want to track it chronologically. There's a clause there called duration, clause 2. Do you see
Yes,
that?
Yes.
Now, one of the things that the ESCOM legal team wanted to add, well, there's one revision in 2.1, which reads, this agreement shall commence on the effective date and shall continue for a period of 3 years and terminate on the 30th of April 2017. The previous version had been only 1 year. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware, but I take it from you.
Right. But now it's going to a 3-year contract. And then in 2.2, they say the following. ESCOM reserves the right to withdraw its sponsorship at any time in the event of a breach by TNA Media of any of the terms of this agreement, as per clause 9 of this agreement, or, and this is a clause of significance, for any other reason on 30 days written notice to TNA. Do you see that?
Yes.
Mr. Pretorius's evidence yesterday was that that type of exit clause was standard in these types of agreements, and he explained why. He said ESCOM was in a precarious financial position at this point. It would always have wanted an exit clause in agreements of this nature because media spend, quite frankly, is a nice to have when your company is in a difficult financial position. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that. I heard him saying that, but I don't know how the other contract did look like.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you don't dispute his evidence
I
about the
don't
other
di-
contracts?
I don't dispute that evidence.
Right, so then we move to the follow-up, which is the cancer.
I'm sorry,
Pardon.
Ms. Hoffman. The amendments, I wanted to say the ones in red, but I see this is not red,
Yes.
maybe brown.
Yes.
Were those made by ESCOM legal
Legal.
people
Yeah.
or lawyers?
ESCOM lawyers.
Lawyers.
When you look at my
Yes,
email,
yes.
it has got a Mr. Tsolanku,
Yes,
was the second in command
yes.
in the
hierarchy, the legal
in the
team,
hierarchy of legal team.
division.
Yes.
Yeah, when I said all ESCOM legal people, it's because I wanted to make sure that whether it's internal lawyers or
No,
outside
internal.
lawyers.
No, internal
Internal, okay, okay.
And then that protection for ESCOM is followed up at page 59, if we can just go there.
I don't know whether, Ms. Hofmeyer, you have mentioned this at 2.1 or whether you're going to come back to it. Then it is strange, is it not, Mr. Chair, that TNA sends ESCOM a draft agreement whose clause 2.1 said no, I'm sorry. 2.2, the 2.2 said, well, it wasn't 2.2 maybe when it was sent by TNA, but it had a clause that said ESCOM reserved the right to withdraw its sponsorship at any time in the event of a breach by TNA of any of the terms of this agreement. Okay, no, I think I now understand the query. So TNA wanted ESCOM to be only able to withdraw the sponsorship if there was a breach on their side.
Yes.
But your legal department added a clause to say even if there is no breach,
Yes.
ESCOM should be able to give you 30 days
Yeah.
notice to terminate, to withdraw the
I hope this is
sponsorship.
what it means. I'm not a lawyer. So
Yeah, no, that's fine, yeah.
Indeed.
Okay, now I
That is-
understand, yeah.
That is as we understand it, and as Mr. Pretorius indicated yesterday.
Yes.
That's an important clause for ESCOM.
Yes, yes.
Particularly in its
yes.
financial position.
Yes.
And given that media spend is not a
Yes.
core aspect of the
Yes.
ESCOM business.
Yes.
And Chair, just to confirm that point, what the legal team also did at ESCOM was at page 59 to add clause 11.2,
Yes.
which in case there was any doubt from clause 2.2, can be overcome by 11.2, because there again it's stipulated ESCOM will have the right to terminate this agreement for any reason on
Yes.
30 days written notice.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And then, Mr. Trejo, if we move to page 63, 6.3,
6-3. Yes.
I'd actually like to follow the email train from the relevant earliest email. And so if you go over the page to 64, 6.4, you'll see an email there in the middle of the page from Ms. Kaur to Ms. Dlamini. Who is Ms. Kaur?
Legal.
Legal. And Ms. Dlamini is sitting in your office,
In my
as I
office.
understand it. And it says re-sponsorship. It says, Dear Pelile, I have revised the payment clause to link it to each event and strengthen the right to cancel in terms of clause 12.2. I've enclosed version 9 of the draft agreement. Chair, just to assist, by the time the agreement becomes draft 9, that termination clause is now 12.2. It was previously 11.2, but you can rest assured it's the same cancellation clause. It's that ESCOM can do so on any basis on 30 days' notice. Then, just to follow the correspondence, if you go back to page 63, Ms. Kaur clarifies for Ms. Dlamini, who'd asked some follow-up questions about that version. She says, Hi, Pelile, I'm mad. I think that's supposed to be made the changes as per Muhammad instructions. I take that to be a reference to Mr. Adam, is that right? On payment and the issue relating to cancellation for convenience. Please advise what you require from us as version 8 was drafted as per your instructions. And then Ms. Kaur writes to you later in that day. Do you see at the top of the page?
Yes.
And she says there, Dear Chose, please be advised that as per the delegation of authority, the CE, the Chief Executive, is the one authorized to sign the sponsorship agreement on behalf of ESCOM, as the sponsorship exceeds 3 million rand. Further, the CE is required to do so in consultation with EXCO, or he can delegate it to ICAS. That's the committee we saw
earlier on.
Mr. Pretorius went to. The sponsorship is in excess of 3 million, must be subject to the approved budget. Do you see all of that?
Yes.
Did you communicate any of that to Mr. Majila?
Yes, it was communicated. Remember, this is in response from a question by Mr. Fredin Doe. I don't know whether you have that communication. It was not out of the blue.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that comes later, actually.
Yeah.
But let's just be
but
clear.
that was in relation to that,
So you recall communicating to Mr. Majila,
most definitely.
there's a process.
That's a process.
It requires EXCO if the sponsorship is for more than 3 million.
Yes.
This sponsorship is for more than 3
Yeah.
million.
And if Mr. Mohammed would have been there, these discussions about the contract itself were happening between Mohammed, was on EXCO, was not ESCO, and the chief executive officer. They were talking about, so it was not like the chief executive officer is not aware
Yes.
of the delegation of authority. Especially, he had been a board member for quite some time and sat on the ACC committee, which is the real committee that do that. Yes, but FEMIDA tells me, and if you look on, I even say to FEMIDA,
Ms. Kaur.
Ms. FEMIDA, Ms. Kaur, this is the say name, sorry, the cellular phone for Mr. Ndo. Feel free to talk to him directly, which means feel free to talk to the office of the Chief Executive Officer, because I'm getting confused about the legal issues. It was my way of saying, you know, if you're asking question, who's the delegation of authority, now it has to come to me, and then I have to pass there. I look stupid because these are legal issues, not. So feel free. And I allow her to say, and I give the cell phone, because normally an email may take a very long time.
The last point she makes in that email at the top of page 63 is that the sponsorship is in excess of 3 million and must be subject to the approved budget. What was the sponsorship budget at that stage?
I don't know, but go back. Remember, we were in the process, and I don't know whether you came across those documents, but I saw them somewhere. We are asking each and every division now to tell us, let me, for the purpose of the chairman here, at ESCOM in the past, we wouldn't know what is the sponsorship except your sponsorship. As you would have your own sponsorship.
For your division.
For your division and that. And you would sponsor whatever you like. The only thing that you have to do is you have to go to the sponsorship committee so that they can see whether what you are sponsoring is. So this time around, they wanted to centralize sponsorship under me, you see. So we went to different, and that process had not been completed.
So I can tell you, because it comes up in the documents later, the sponsorship budget at that point in your division was 30 million. Does that sound right?
In my division? Probably before that process, because it actually came much more down on that because.
Well, the financial director said that it was at 30 million at this stage.
Yeah, no.
Do you have any reason to dispute that?
No, I don't have any reason to dispute that.
But what is being signaled here by legal is that it must be subject to the approved budget of your division. Is that correct?
No, not my division. The sponsorship is, no, they know this thing comes from the Chief Executive Officer already. They are not involving me. You see,
So it's
because
approved budget of whatever division is responsible
is
for it.
responsible. But also, because it's 3 million, it must be approved by the Chief Executive Officer.
And
Exco.
Exco.
Yeah, and Exco. So I'm out of.
You are out of it.
Out of it. Even if it was me who wanted it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Immediately I put it at 3 million. The powers.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll come back to that in due course when we get to the financial director's correspondence. But let's just move to page 67, if we may, 67.
Before you do that,
Apologies,
Ms. Hofmeyer, I see that when I asked Mr. Chew about clause 2, I asked him about only one question and forgot the other. Clause 2 of the draft agreement that was sent by TNA to ESCOM.
Yes.
It looks like am I right to think that it looks like TNA had in mind that the agreement would be for 1 year, but ESCOM lawyers said 3 years?
No, I'm not sure, but I don't know. But I
see
think
3 years, and I
it is-
see what appears like 1 year. So certainly there was year, maybe there was a space before year without indicating how many years. And then S was added 2 years, and then there's 3 in a figure, and then there's 3 in brackets. There's on, and then E has been added. Is that something you know nothing about?
no.
Oh, okay. Okay. I don't know whether Ms. Hofmeyer is something that you
There is something I might be able to shed light on.
Yeah.
Ms. Lamini was in your office, is that correct, Mr. Trejo? At page 64, she responds to a query from Ms. Kaur. Ms. Kaur, in the middle of the page, is talking about the payment clause.
Page 64.
Yes. that's been linked to each event and to strengthen the right to cancel in terms of clause 12.2. And then Ms. Domini responds to her and says, "Hi, Femida. The contract version 8 was sent to the CE earlier. We saw that email previously. I think I will wait and see what he says now. There is a strong preference for the year 1, year 2, and year 3 payment per version 8. Is there a significant difference between the two versions?" So where would Ms. Dlamini have got that information from?
I don't know. No, that is why I am not copied here. The reason I am not copied here is because Ms. Dlamini is aware that as it comes to the contract itself, what should be in the contract must ultimately be what the Chief Executive Officer is comfortable to sign. So if you look at 80% of the emails of all the changes, my name is not there. It's always between TNA, this is the change we want, and what do you call it? Mohammed, Adam, and the Office of the Chief Executive Officer. And as you see, I'm excluded from all the technicalities, what you want, what you don't know. And the most important person there, of course, they're talking to themselves. They're talking to themselves. Yeah, I'm not there that just, but he doesn't get it from me because they're talking between the Office of the Chief Executive Officer,
And your office.
Doe, and the office. She is in my office doing this. In the Office of the Chief Executive Officer is Fredin Doe.
I understand.
And
that.
Mohammed, I must mention,
Yes.
is also speaking to the Chief Executive Officer.
Yes, yes. But when the TNA interacts with ESCOM, they seem mainly to correspond with you. Is that correct?
Not all of the time, yes,
But predominantly.
predominantly, as
Thank
a
you.
boss of the division.
So let's go to 67 for that email.
67.
Chair and Mr. Treyer, we were previously in
67.
emails
Sorry.
on the 24th of April. We now move to emails around the 29th of April. And I'd like to pick it up in the middle of the page where Mr. Hauer writes to you, Mr. Treyer. Do you see that? Now, this is after they've received revision 9, which
Yes.
is the one we were looking at, Chair. And this reads, "Hi, Chose. Thank you for taking my call earlier about the current draft, which is a little bit different to the one agreed between us previously." So was it you who was coming to the agreements with TNA about the terms of the contract?
No, and I think he was referring to the contract number 1, number 2, the old contracts.
Well, I'm not sure that can be right because he says the current draft is a little bit different to the one agreed between us previously. On reading it, the changes noted include. So he's talking about changes in the current draft of
Yes.
the third agreement.
Yes.
So had you agreed with him previously different terms?
No, not at all, because remember, go back. When the contract arrived, I sent it to legal straight away. So I would not have agreed with him on a contract and then send it to legal.
So why is he saying the one that was agreed between you previously?
I don't know, subject him to that. I don't know.
Did you go back to him and say we didn't agree anything previously?
No, I did not go. I took back to Mohammed, to the legal, because the decision on the contract and how it should be, especially to be signed by the Chief Executive Officer, it must be Mohammed who decides that.
Well, we'll come to that engagement in a moment, but let's go on in this email if we may. Mr. Howard goes on, he says, on reading it, the changes noted include paragraph 2.1, in which a termination clause has been added. Our understanding is that paragraph 2.2 with its breach conditions would cover termination. Paragraph 12.2, the very ones we've been focusing on. His comment there is, we're 100% behind termination based on breach, but have some difficulty with the introduction of this kind of clause, which was not included in the previous versions or agreements. And then he ends off by saying, I'm sure that this is an oversight in drafting and is easily correctable. after which I would be happy to receive a corrected version.
Yes.
It's a key protection for Eskom in the agreement, isn't it, Mr.
Yes.
Treyu? But Mr. Hauer seems to think it's an oversight in drafting. Why do you think he formed that view?
I don't know.
Seems very strange that he
does.
should think that.
And that it's easily correctable. But nonetheless, that's what he says to you on the 29th of April. And then, Mr. Treyu, at the top of the page,
Which
you
page?
then, the same page, 67.
Oh, 67, yes.
I think this was what you were referring to in your testimony a moment ago. You take Mr. Hauer's email and you forward it to Mr. Adam and
Yes.
the rest of his legal team,
Yes.
right? And you say, "Hi, Femida, please refer to mail from TNA below and assist, respond," right? So you were leaving it up to them to respond to Mr. Hauer,
Yes.
correct? Let's find that response if we may. It's at page 80, 80,
Page,
80.
okay. Oh, we're jumping to 80. Yes, ma'am.
Now, this is Mr. Adam. If we go to the top of the page there, the bottom of the page, Chair, is the email we've just seen, where Mr. Treyu forwards it to Mr. Adam and says, "Please refer to the email and respond." And then we have Mr. Adam responding to you and the rest of his team. Chair, is going to be relevant later, but the 29th of April 2014 was a Tuesday. So that's the day on which this communication is taking place. And Mr. Adam says to you there, Mr. Treyu, "Chose, you need to make a call based on commercial need. It was not an oversight. It was deliberately drafted to allow for cancellation on 30 days' notice. I would recommend retaining our wording." Do you see that?
Yes.
What did you do with that indication to you?
I agreed with this indication, and Mohammed was discussing, you see, this, also Mohammed was discussing it with the Chief Executive Officer. That is why you would see in the Goboto information, he even gives justification as to why he thought that he did not sign the contract as was proposed by what do you call it? By Mohammed. And the contract that I sent to TNA was the contract that Mohammed wanted TNA to sign.
Correct. And then Mr. Howard comes back and says, "I think there must be an oversight because you've added a termination clause
Yes.
that will benefit Eskom." And Mr. Adam responds to you after you forward Mr. Howard's email to him, and he says, "Chose, you need to make the call based on commercial need. It was not an oversight. His recommendation is that it be retained." Do you recall that?
Yes, I recall that.
What did you do?
What I did is I think I informed the Chief Executive Officer, and I sent the contract back as the changes were to Howard to say, this is what Eskom wants, not what you want.
Let's pick it up at page 83 then, because that's when, in the Friday of the week, you engage with Mr. Majila.
Wait, yes,
So just to recap, on Tuesday, Mr. Adam of the legal department says, "Mr. Treyu, you must make a call on this. In his view, we must retain the clause. It wasn't an oversight. It protects Eskom." Right. And then on the Friday of the week, you write to Mr. Majila directly, copying Mr. Ndo, and you say, "Hi, Colin. Attached are 2 copies of contract versions signed by TNA. I had final discussions with them on Wednesday." That's the day after Mr. Adam had relayed to you the importance of that clause. And you say, "We've reached agreement on almost all clauses. Still in dispute is the clause regarding termination. TNA does not want Eskom to include the following clause. and then you quote 12.2, which is the right to cancel on 30 days' notice. And then you add, you will notice that they've removed the clause from both signed versions of the contracts.
Yes.
Why did they sign a version of the contract, Mr. Treyu, that didn't have the clause that would protect Eskom in it?
Because they didn't want it. That is clear. And that is what I'm telling the Chief Executive Officer to say. And I was conscious all the time that Mohammed is busy talking to the Chief Executive Officer regarding this. Now, I take a contract that comes from legal, send it to a TNA. And TNA said, no, you recall that we don't want this, we are not going to sign it, we're signing the following one. And I go to the guy who wants the contract, you see, and his office to say, this is the contract. And I mentioned there, I had a final discussion with them on Wednesday. We have reached agreement on all clauses. Still in dispute is the clause regarding termination. In my mind, I thought I'm making aware that this is still in dispute.
Mr. Treyu, can I say, when I look at this correspondence, and I'm putting this to you in fairness, it seems a number of people within Eskom thought that this was your decision to make. You see, the financial director, we'll come to her later, thought the relevant budget was the sponsorship budget. You'll see what she says later about it exceeding it. You've got Mr. Adam saying to you, you must make the call on commercial need, because this, after all, is a sponsorship, and it's always been dealt with by your division. Were they all misunderstanding the position?
I was not disputing what they're saying. That is why I sent the contract with their clauses to TNA.
But whose ultimate decision was it to make? Because Mr. Adams said you need to make the decision on whether to retain the termination clause.
No, this is, yes, I'm saying it's still in dispute. I totally did not agree. That is why it is totally unfair, and that is why, in fact, if you read the Zondo thing, I'm not sorry, Chair.
I haven't written anything.
Not to your knowledge, Chair.
Not to my knowledge.
The Goboto report says I was involved. Everybody was involved. Legal was involved. Anybody. But there it's clear that the clause was taken out by the TNA. And I mentioned it in my communication to the guy who's going to sign this, the Chief Executive Officer. And later, when the Chief Executive Officer is being asked, why did you sign the contract with the, and he says, I thought it was on, him. He doesn't say Chose, he doesn't say, I thought it was onerous on TNA. And let me say, as these things happen, Mohammed is talking to him, and they're disagreeing. You see, the legal guy is talking to him.
Mr.
And
Chair,
these are legal issues. I don't want to get involved in the legal issues. But notwithstanding the fact that I don't want to be involved in the legal issues, I mentioned here that this clause, Chief Executive Officer, before you sign, be careful, is in dispute.
Mr. Treyu, how do you know that Mr. Adam was having these conversations with Mr. Majila?
Because Mr. Adam and I reported to Erika Johnson, and we had our meeting on a regular basis. And his office was next door to my office. And they are being unfair when they said decision has got to be made, because the decision about the third sponsorship had now gone to the Chief Executive Officer.
Did you communicate that to them at all? Did you say you're wrong to think it's my decision to make?
No, I did not. You keep on asking me that type of question. Did I communicate this? I may probably have spoken to them, but it was quite obvious that they're aware this is the chief executive officer because Mohammed was talking to the chief executive officer.
Mr. Traore,
And in any way, if it was my decision to take, the decision I did was to send to TNA the contract with the right clause. I did not remove it and say sign this. I sent them the contract with the right clause. This is what I did, and it's confirmed here.
and Mr. Traore, if you go to page 104
One, on my package,
in your same exhibit MM2,
okay. Yes,
you'll see there that Ms. Dlamini sends to Mr. Magila, Mr. Ndo, and copy to you the signed contract attached. Do you see that?
yes.
Can you just help me with something there? The contract, if you go to the signature page at 114,
1 or 11.
114. Just help me, were you a witness to this contract?
Yes, I witnessed the contract,
Which signature is yours?
the first one.
The first one. And is the signature adjacent to yours the signature of Mr. Magila?
Mr. Machila and then Mr. Ndo.
Okay, now you sent the signed version of the contract to Mr. Magila on the 2nd of May, but this was dated as signed on the 30th of April. How is that possible?
I sent the version.
On the 2nd of May. It was after you had the meeting. That was the Friday. You had the meeting on the Tuesday. I can give you the reference again if you'd like. It's
Wait. This was signed on the 30th of April by Howard.
well, that's the prior page. Look at page
20
113.
113.
Yes. 113 at Midrand on the 30th of April 2014.
That's
Howard
the
signs it.
Yes.
You see? Then the signature for ESCOM indicates that it was signed at Johannesburg on the 30th of April 2014.
I'm not sure of this, but that all those signatures looks like even the writing there belongs to Howard. I don't see our date there. I can't confirm that. I hope this can be investigated.
Yes, because what's curious is that you forwarded it on the 2nd of May to Mr. Magila, indicating the concern about the termination clause,
Yes.
right? And that was a contract that at that stage had been signed by Mr. Hauer on the 30th of April. But then we have the final version signed by Mr. Magila, indicating a day, 2 days earlier than you sent him the contract flagging the problem. Do you see that?
Yeah, I see that.
Do you
That
have
is why,
any-
this is why I said it was, and I said it quite more clearly at the beginning. It was quite aware that there was a lot of communication between Mr. Machila and we are going through the motions. But this, I'm only aware now of the disparities in date. But I did tell him that whatever contract you are going to sign, please know that this contract is not the contract we want.
You told him that verbally.
No, in writing. It's better to you see why if I do it verbally and say, did you write to him? If I go to him.
No, I understand.
And I'm sure he must have spoken to me about it. But I know that Mohammed was engaged all the way with him. I don't know Erica Johnson because Erica was also there.
Mr. Traore, just to conclude this aspect, my concern is that the final agreement that's signed by ESCOM appears to have been signed on the 30th of April. The only written record of you drawing to Mr. Majila's attention the concern about the removal of the termination clause is 2 days later, on the 2nd of May.
No, I hear that.
But is your evidence that you would have communicated that verbally to him at some prior point?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. If we can then just return to your affidavit. And there I would like to...
Ms. Hoffmeyer,
Yes.
we are at
We are
2 minutes past 4. We may go beyond 4 o'clock if that suits everybody, but I wouldn't like us to go beyond 4:30.
Certainly.
Mr. Chair, would that be fine with you if we continue beyond?
Yeah.
Would that be fine? Okay.
Chair, if I may, I'm very optimistic that we will
Yes.
finish Mr. Treyu's evidence by 4:30.
Yes, okay.
However, we have asked Mr. Pomensky, who's been waiting the whole day, to
Yes.
remain.
Yes.
I wonder if we could just get a message to him now that he won't commence today.
Yes, let's
if
do
we're only
that.
going to sit till 4:30.
Yes.
We'd scheduled to start at 9 tomorrow, so if we could commence with
Yes.
Mr. Pomensky tomorrow at 9.
Which I think we must change. I know I
Okay.
agreed to it from last night. I think when I agreed to it, it was during the day yesterday or before yesterday.
Indeed.
From last night, I'm not feeling too great. So I think I mustn't start early if I want to recover pretty
Indeed.
soon.
Indeed.
So let us start at 10 tomorrow.
Certainly.
So that I don't have to rush in the morning.
Indeed.
Depending on how I feel in the afternoon, we might go beyond 4 o'clock if necessary and if everybody is fine with it.
We'll alert the witnesses for
Yes,
tomorrow to that
yes,
prospect at
yes,
this point.
Yes.
Thank you,
Okay,
Chair. We're
thank you.
indebted.
Yes.
We'll get that message across.
Yeah.
Mr. Trejo, if we can then try and wrap this up. We've dealt with the third contract. You're aware that SNG found that you had been involved in the removal of the termination clause.
I actually became very, when they did that and tell me, I only had that when the board was in Parliament during those parliamentary hearings. No one, no chief executive officer, not anybody, even as I speak to you, no one has officially informed me about that. Seeing the report itself, I've been privileged by this process itself. And I'm surprised they say I got involved because then say, well, did I sign it or what have you? Because if it's involved, Mohammed was involved, Pilele was involved, the chief executive officer himself was involved, what have you. Expunging anything? No.
And Mr. Trejo, are you aware that disciplinary proceedings against you were recommended?
Now that we're talking after the fact, because not...
But no one at the time communicated that to you?
Not at all.
No member of the board of ESCOM?
Not at all. I don't remember an email or something like that coming to me.
So when you retired, you didn't know that there was this finding that had been made against you?
No, I already became aware. I was aware on my own through the parliamentary process.
Oh, okay.
But I had
okay.
not seen the report itself.
But prior to the parliamentary
No one
session, nobody had ever told
No
you
one
you
has
were not
ever-
aware of the report either.
ever came to me and say, you know
Yes.
that
There's a finding against you.
the SNG itself
Yeah.
did not even
Did
contact
they
me.
interview you
They interviewed me at the beginning.
and asked you about this issue?
No. They asked me about the
But other
whole-
things?
Yeah, not about the changes there and there.
Ah.
And then the report was done. I was not involved. I was not told by anybody.
Yeah.
However, Chair, these are legal issues. You don't know what's happening. Maybe everything fell into places because then there was Mr. Machila was gone, then it was Mr. Stoner, and then a different board, and my boss, Rika Johnson, left the company, who would have spoken to me maybe. So
Yes.
yeah, I don't know the reasons why.
So maybe it was just because of the change of personnel within the
Yeah.
leadership of the organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
The chairperson of the board remained the same, did he not?
Yeah, Mr. Totti.
Yes.
Yes.
He was a continuous member of the board despite that change. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Mabude was another member of the board who was both in the old board and the new board. Is that correct?
I stand corrected.
Thank you. I don't think it will be
I'm
disputed.
sorry, what was the answer? What was the answer to the
You know, there were so many changes. I know the chairman, but Ms. Mabude, I am not sure whether
whether you know him?
I know her very well.
Yes.
But whether he had left because the change,
Oh.
you see, it will be the timing. It's,
Yes, okay.
Yeah. The fact that, yes, she was a board member, yes. But the period and the changes.
Yeah,
were-
that's what you are not
Because
sure
what
about.
they did, Chair, what makes it difficult, they didn't take the board away, all of it.
At the same
Yeah,
time?
they'll
Yeah.
take 2 here, out 1 there.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
synchronizing the date.
Yes.
One has to look at them.
okay.
Indeed. Chair, we'll deal with Mr. Pomensky about that, but for present
Yes.
purposes, I don't take it to be disputed.
Okay.
There were 2 members of the old board that remained on the new board,
Yes,
despite
okay.
the change in December 2014.
Okay.
Which was just after the SNG report, and the
Okay.
issue of the board ratifying the contract was concerned. Mr. Treyer, were you aware that the ESCOM board ratified the 43 million rand contract?
After the fact.
After the fact?
Yeah.
When did you come to learn that?
I'm not sure. Remember that of my position, I'm no more an EXCO member.
Indeed,
So
indeed.
we aren't privy.
So there were some things that you would not know by virtue of the fact
Not
that you
even
were
some
no
things.
longer.
The majority of issues that happened to the board were always kept confidential.
Okay.
Unless you are, in fact, there was a point where even EXCO members
Yeah,
were only called to the board when the board has to deal with what is relevant to them.
okay.
So,
Okay.
there came a point where people are saying things as, what do you call it? Leaks, there are too many leaks and all, this type of thing. But to answer your question rightly, no. I only became aware after the fact that this contract has been ratified by the board.
And when you say after the fact, are we in 2015 that you learned, or 2016, or 2017? Do you have any idea?
No. Very close, but not, because one of the decisions was that the breakfast are going to continue. So, and then in that resolution,
Right.
they said that my division must then go and continue with the breakfast.
Yes, that is the point I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, just
Mr.
to help you,
Pretorius,
normally what would happen is that they will give you only, you'll never get the discussions and everything. They will give you only
That which relates to you.
not even
Or to
all
your
that relates to
department.
you, the decision.
Oh,
Yeah.
now, part of the decision was, may have been, there's a bit of a query, Chair, about when this decision was actually taken, but we're going to probe that with some later witnesses. But the resolution, the round-robin resolution, recorded that your division would be instructed to obtain maximum value from the contract. Do you recall that?
I recall that.
And did you do any reports to the board about that?
No. No, wait. I can't say. Just recall that, and one thing that is important because it doesn't come out a lot. Every division reported to the board, every board meeting, to the committee. So we reported to what is called the CES committee, religiously about everything. Yes, we did. But not in the manner, I don't know whether you're asking, we took and said, because you gave us this decision,
Yes.
no. We would go and tell them, we had this breakfast, so many people and all of, so that would be in the minutes of the sustainability, social and sustainability committee.
Oh, we'd have to look in the committee. That's helpful, because we've looked at the main board meetings and we didn't pick up any reporting there.
Yeah.
But you're indicating it would have been at committee level.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but we never did a 49M breakfast,
Yes.
comprehensive
Understood.
report. No,
Understood.
we talked about what we did last month.
Let's then conclude, if we may, at page 10 of your affidavit. The last topic I'd like,
Sorry.
apology, page 10. This is in MM2.
Yes.
I hope to be swift here, Mr. Treyu. It's just the topic of subscriptions to the TNA newspaper,
Yes.
which you pick up at paragraph 9 there. Until this point, we've been talking about the business breakfasts, and we haven't been talking much about, or at all, about subscriptions to the newspaper. You say two things here. You say at 9.1, during the June 2011 meeting with TNA, the matter of subscriptions was also discussed. I take it that must also be corrected to be the 1st of August meeting. Remember, you changed it earlier.
Yes.
Right, we'll make that change. You say, I was not involved in this, but I called Ms. Wadja on the possibility of Eskom subscribing to the TNA newspaper.
Yes.
And you say Ms. Wadja managed everything related to newspapers within Corporate Affairs Division. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did you have no other involvement in the subscriptions with TNA beyond what you record at paragraph 9.1?
In as far as we should subscribe to newspapers, the only way that I was involved is when now they started, can they please deliver free newspapers to Eskom?
So you weren't involved prior to that when you were paying for the newspapers?
No, recall that, let's go back to the beginning. Jack Rue, when he wrote to me, the very first at the beginning, about the fact that they would like us to subscribe the newspapers, I referred the matter to Raisa. And Mr. Pretoria spoke a lot about what happened in that meeting. And the reason why I was not involved, apart from the fact that I delegated the responsibility to the people, is the intricate way in which the newspapers were working at Eskom.
Okay, let's go to some of the documents, if we may, and I hope to be brief. The first subscription was for 30 newspapers. Do you recall that?
I may recall that, but that's why I wanted to explain first, because they may have followed a process. The library, working with Ms. Wadja, who decide on procurement of newspapers. And the classical way they would do it is the library will have its own newspapers. The media desk also ensure that they have almost each and every newspapers for purposes of responding to questions and monitoring what is happening. That's number 2. Number 3, and most unique, was that each and every executive, and I'm not sure whether even GM, you would fill up a form every year of the newspapers that you would want to deliver at your office, and the magazines and all those type of things. And the regions had a different system. So it was not as centralized as you, and that is why I sent it to, and I'm sure that's why they took 30 newspapers. Probably what they did, I suspect, they contacted the GMs or whoever to say, which one of you would want to get a TNA newspaper? But I don't know the process that they followed.
Okay, let's go to a bundle MM1B, if we may.
That's at page?
And I want to pick up page 805, Chair.
80.
It's right towards the end, under tab 33.
705.
Apologies, 805.
805.
This is an annexure to Ms. Wadja's affidavit, and it sets out the spend.
Sorry, 8
05.
or 8, not, okay.
Yeah, I think I confused you and said 7. 805.
So this is a annexure to Ms. Waja's affidavit, in which she confirms that the first subscription for newspapers with TNA was for 30 copies on a daily basis. Mr. Treyer, you can pick it up under the heading 2.2 subscriptions on that page. Do you see that?
Yes.
The first bullet says Eskom has committed 25,148 Rand on the New Age subscriptions for the year. And the table below outlines comparisons of subscriptions at MWP, is that Megawatt Park?
Yes.
You can see we've been doing quite a bit of Eskom evidence. We know the acronyms. And Midrand offices. She says additional areas unconfirmed. But you look down there, and what I just want to highlight is the New Age is about the 6th line down, and it reflects 30 copies at 25,000 Rand or thereabouts. Do you see that?
Yes.
The highest number of copies of any newspaper on this table, as I have it, is Business Day. Do you see that? Further down the page.
Yes.
And there it's 140 copies per day, and that costs in the order of 319,000 Rand. Do you see that?
Yes.
That, as I read this table, is the most copies of any newspaper that was being procured at this time. Is that a correct reading, Mr. Treyu? But what then happens is after Eskom agrees to get 30 daily copies at a cost of 25,000 Rand, they then commit to taking 2,000 daily copies. Were you aware of that?
I may be aware of it, but I don't recall that because of the fact that I was not so closer, because Elsa wrote, and who was in charge of the library, and the others were working together.
Mr. Treyu, Ms. Waja says you instructed her to increase the subscription from 30 daily copies to 2,000 daily copies. You'll find that, if you go back a bit, at page 799. She says in her affidavit at 799 at paragraph 10.1, after the above meeting, that's a meeting that was happening in 2011, between Brian Damas and the TNA leadership, I was verbally requested by Mr. Treyu to increase Eskom's TNA subscriptions from 30 daily copies to 2,000 daily copies. She says she couldn't find email correspondence detailing my request for the library to increase the subscriptions. However, Ms. Root's email outlined the details. So is Ms. Waja incorrect when she said you requested her to increase them from 30 to 2,000?
No, not at all. Remember, Ms. Waja started speaking to Mr. Ru in June, and they've been talking about that. I was not involved in the decision of the newspapers.
Not at all.
Not at all to say increase from this. The only time that I was ever involved in the newspapers is when they wanted to deliver free newspapers.
The only time, Mr. Treyu.
Not. I may have, let me say, I may have spoken to them, but to make a decision to say, make this 2,000.
Yes.
I would have received a proposal from, unless there's a proposal, I would have received a proposal from New Age to do so. Is there a proposal here?
Well, Mr. Treyu, there is a letter from you in July of 2012
Where is it?
at page 816.
Sorry.
Asking for the 2,000 copies
Where you are?
to now be increased to 4,000 daily copies. So this is at page 816. As I understand it, it's a letter written to the library/tender committee. And if you pick it up at the third paragraph on that page, It reads, in this regard, a strategic decision has been taken to provide Eskom employees around the country with complimentary copies of the publication, as but one of many options adopted to achieve the above. Due to the interest from employees, we found it necessary to recently extend the distribution to 4,000 copies. And if you go over the page at 817, Corporate Affairs requests that the New Age newspaper subscription contract be renewed for a period of 2 years with an option to amend the subscription numbers each year based on the needs of the organization. We trust that this will be met favorably. Is that your signature in support?
No, that's my signature, but I don't recall this letter very well. Because as I said, the newspaper mostly was the responsibility of the library, but here it looks like Raisa did make a recommendation of this nature.
And you approved it?
Yes.
You supported
Yes.
going to 4,000 daily copies?
Yeah.
Mr. Treyu, at the time that you went to 2,000 daily copies, the highest number of other copies from any other newspaper was 140. What could possibly have justified getting 2,000 copies of the New Age?
I don't think what could have justified that. I think it was a mistake.
Do you know what the cost was? It cost Eskom 1.3 million rand.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
the documents that are, excuse me, in this bundle, where your statement is,
Yes.
I take it you have had a chance to look at all of them prior to giving evidence.
No, this one I didn't see. It's not in my bundle that was sent to me.
It's an annexure to Mr. Pretorius's bundle.
Okay, it's not in your bundle.
Indeed.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, okay. So you didn't remember it, but now that you see it,
Yeah, but
you
no,
remember.
that I see it, yeah.
Yes, okay.
Do you know what the 4,000 copies was going to cost Eskom?
I don't remember, ma'am.
That one, as I have the record, Mr. Treyu, was not entered into, but it would have cost Eskom 7 million rand if it had been approved.
That is annually,
Over the 2 years. It
over
was
the
going to
2
be
years.
2 years when it increased to 4,000.
Yes.
But when it was increased to 2,000, that was an annual subscription,
Yes.
and that cost 1.3 million. And that
Yes.
was paid.
Okay.
But you agree now, Mr. Treyu, that it was an error to have spent 1.3 million on 2,000 daily copies of the TNA. Is that right?
Yeah, but I don't know how, it's an error, so I'm not making a rebuttal to this. But of course, the country, what other people were paying, because this was now for the whole country.
Yes, indeed. My point simply is that
We
the
may-
next largest was 140 copies
Across South Africa.
for Megawatt Park and Midrand.
Yeah, so I don't know how much.
I
was-
see. There might have been higher numbers in the other divisions.
The whole country, we were receiving newspapers of these other divisions, so I don't know.
And was the 2,000 for Megawatt, or was it for the whole country?
It was
Do
for
you
the
know?
whole country.
Thank you.
They were going to deliver at different places.
So
Understood.
I think it might be important to get figures
Yes,
for
for the whole,
all the
indeed.
newspapers nationally.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We'll do that. Eskom will certainly have that information.
Yes. But of course, I take it that before you approved or supported the idea that 4,000 copies should be purchased daily, you would have, excuse me, wanted to know what the cost would be.
Yes.
Otherwise, you wouldn't approve without knowing what costs, what the cost implications would be for Eskom.
Yeah, I think I should have known by that time, so that
Yes, yes. What I mean is, you might not remember now
yes,
what the costs were going to be,
yes.
but before approving, you would have asked, what will this cost the company?
Yes,
Yes, you just can't remember what
Yes,
the
yes,
answer
yes.
must have been.
yes.
Okay.
It's not necessary to go there, but it is recorded in a later mandate request as being 7.056 million. Thank you. Mr. Chweyu?
But it does mean that if there were a number of newspapers that were purchased for various offices of ESCOM, were purchased by ESCOM for its staff and so on, at high figures. I mean, if even the 100 and whatever that you were talking about, that was the highest, or 200
Yes.
or something,
Yes.
if it was just for Megawatt Park, if for the whole country there was, then it certainly would go quite high. If that is true, then it would mean that ESCOM must have been spending a lot of money on simply newspapers for its staff. Millions.
Indeed.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Trey. In summary, then, if I may, we have about 2 minutes to go, which should just about do us. I'd just like to conclude on a few aspects in summary in relation to your evidence, so that we can be clear as to my understanding of it. Mr. Trejo, the first and the third TNA contracts for the business breakfasts were concluded despite there being insufficient budget available for those contracts. Is that correct?
Yes.
And without there being sponsorship committee approval, correct?
Yes, correct.
The second contract was concluded despite the sponsorship committee actually declining to support that contract. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the third contract of 43 million was found by SNG to have constituted irregular expenditure. Are you aware of that?
Now,
Again, at the time you weren't aware.
Not at all.
You were aware that they were investigating it, though, weren't you?
Yes, no, I was very much aware.
And you also were aware of the process that needed to be followed for sponsorships. Is that not correct?
Yes.
And you accept that those processes were not followed in relation to the TNA contracts?
All the contracts.
And Mr. Trey, you also knew that the legal department had advised that that termination clause in the third contract should remain. Is that correct?
Yes.
And despite that, it was concluded without the termination clause, correct?
Yes.
I'm sure you'll also accept that when Mr. Adam relayed his view to you, he said that it was for you to make the commercial decision. You accept that that's what his email said?
No, I don't accept that, but I did carry out his instruction like that.
You don't accept that?
I don't
it
accept
was,
that. I
received
did
the
not
email.
carry I carried his instructions, hence the contract which was signed to TNA were contracts just as he wanted.
Indeed. And then when the issue arose, you met with TNA and you forwarded a signed version of the contract to Mr. Majila without the clauses.
With an email saying, this is in dispute.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. And finally, no disciplinary steps were ever taken against you in relation to the conduct on the third contract,
Yes,
and not in relation to the second contract either.
no.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Those
And
are our questions.
the point is not any of the two contracts were found irregular by internal audit as the third one.
I understand that.
But of course, you have said that they were all irregular insofar as they were sponsorships.
Yes, Chair,
Yeah.
but with the proviso that the team, the marketing team, because it's not me who followed that process.
Yes, but I'm talking about your own view.
The two teams
Yes.
that did, in their view, because they were dealing with a media house. They then decided that the best way, and as it even appears on Mr. Pretoria's statement, that the best way to deal with this combo is to do it through media shop.
But in terms of your view, that's different.
Where in retrospect, we look at it, which they should have
Yes.
separated.
Yes.
They should have separated, not looked at the whole combo as one.
Yes. Now, I think that you have said that certainly at a certain stage, maybe when parliamentary questions started arriving and journalists started asking questions about these contracts, you concluded
Yes.
that these agreements between ESCOM and TNA were wrong, and they were,
Eating on our reputation big time.
they were damaging your reputation as ESCOM. And as far as you were concerned, you didn't want ESCOM to continue with them. Is that right?
That's quite correct.
Yes. And in terms of value, on whether they added any value to ESCOM against the background of the money that ESCOM was putting into them. What is your position? I know we have discussed it before, but I want to be quite clear where you stand on that. Are you saying right from the beginning they didn't add any value worth mentioning to ESCOM against the money that ESCOM was putting into it? Or are you saying they did add some value, but it was negligible value?
I don't know about negligible value, but
I'm trying to...
they did add some value, I would say that, and I'm saying that because there was some certain level of leadership, and I compare them with some niche market that we did. But having said that, the value they added, even if it was 100%, the reputation attached was so devastating that maybe
It was not worth it.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Because, but people were reading the newspapers, people got to know about what is happening, people got to know. So even I would argue that, I may not argue 87% or 0%, but they had an impact on people knowing and understanding 49M and ISMO, especially when the minister started going to different areas, getting into houses and television coming in there. They did have some impact, but at a terrible reputation.
Let's leave out the damage to the reputation. Are you saying that when you look at the millions of rands that ESCOM put into them, are you saying that ESCOM was justified in entering into these contracts?
No, we could have done better. But I don't want to talk about that because I don't know the...
Well, on what you know.
Yes.
On what you know.
Yeah, no.
Are you able to say ESCOM was justified in entering into them, bearing in mind what the money that, the millions of rands that ESCOM put into it?
Chair, they could have got in there a much more, I don't know whether the word cheaper is better, not at the amount at which they did.
Well, when you put it like that, it's like you are running away from saying justified or not justified. And that's what
Maybe
I want.
it's because I don't understand the word justify so much that, because what I'm saying is, for example, an advert
Yes.
gives you a certain value.
Yes.
Media exposure. Better 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 people gives you a certain value. So I think it would be wrong to totally say there was no value. But I think we pay just too much for that.
Well, you see,
Oh, sorry.
value, a certain value is so negligible that you shouldn't even mention it if, in the end, what you pay for it is unjustified. Is it? You would agree with the proposition?
I would agree with the proposition, adding also, I still recall, as I argued earlier on, that you may
Yeah.
have a very expensive player who plays extremely well and
Yes.
scores the goal, and you
Yes.
win the awards.
Yes.
You know, you get billions out of them. But the
Yes.
reputation may be so
Yes,
devastating that
Yes.
even with that value,
yes.
and that's why I'm trying to.
Yes, no, I understand that part. That's why I'm taking the reputational risk aside, because maybe that's what you see when the contract is running, you know. Of course, at the beginning of the contract, you have a duty to make an assessment whether there may be a risk to your reputation. In some cases, you make the assessment and you think there'll be no risk, and then you conclude the contract. In some cases, you think there will be no risk, but a risk happens and it materializes and your reputation is damaged. But that only happens when the contract is running. But I look at when ESCOM was approached. I'm trying to see whether, when you look at what ESCOM spent and what ESCOM may have got, if you think it got any value from this, whether you would say, leaving out the reputational risk,
Yes, Chair.
whether you would say, no, we were justified as ESCOM to enter into this contract. That's what I'm trying to.
No.
You would not be able to say that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I find it very difficult to
Yes.
say that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Nothing.
Nothing further.
else. Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw. We appreciate that you came to give evidence. If a need arises, we will ask you to come back, but for now, you are excused. It looks like you want to say something.
I think Mr. Chweyu is complaining that he's been here for 2 days, so I do apologize for that. Part of it might have been the extent to which you wanted to answer some of the questions, but that's what happens in these proceedings.
Yes, but thank you very much, Mr. Shaw. So we will then adjourn, and then
Which one do I take?
If we can just
Yeah,
conclude
yeah.
the proceedings.
we'll adjourn, and then tomorrow we'll start at 10.
At 10,
Yeah.
indeed, Chair.
We
Thank you.
adjourn. Thank you.
All rise.